Before I introduce our distinguished speaker tonight, I would like to start with a little clip from where we see her acting 33 or 35 years ago in the legislature, during a press conference that Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher gave in Hong Kong.
Prime Minister, on Wednesday you signed an agreement with China promising to deliver over 5 million people into the hands of a communist dictatorship. Is this morally defensible, or is it really true that in international politics the highest form of morality is one's own national interest?
Can I just say this to you? What do you think would have happened if we had not attempted to get an agreement? 1997, 92% of the territory would automatically have returned to China without any assurances, without any of the advantages of the agreement that we have now. May I not put it to you that the situation now is vastly better for Hong Kong and accepts and honors and acknowledges the fact that China wishes the lifestyle of Hong Kong to continue under that agreement. I think you would have had great cause to complain had the government of Great Britain done nothing until 1997. And I believe that most of the people, indeed the overwhelming number of people in Hong Kong, think the same. You may be a solitary exception.
Very good. At regular intervals, a project that is running in Cambridge, which is called Against Modernity Without Restraints, organizes public lectures here at St. Catherine's College. And tonight I'm delighted to welcome Emily Lau from Hong Kong to join us here and to give a distinguished lecture on the topic Hong Kong, Whence and Whither. She has come here mainly to see us, to talk to us, but she added upon a number of very important meetings with politicians and journalists in London, which will happen in the next week. So we start off here, and before I pass the word on to her, I would like to introduce her briefly. Mrs. Emily Lau was a member of the Hong Kong Legislative Council from 1991 to 1997 and from 1998 to 2016. And she was the first woman directly elected to the Legislative Council of Hong Kong. She was a chairperson of the Democratic Party from 2012 to 2016. She's also a member of the board of directors of the China Human Rights Lawyers Concern Group and an individual member of Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats. A little bit about her education and the background. She is originally a journalist. She received a BA from the University in Journalism, Broadcast Journalism from the University of Southern California in 1976, where she also regularly attended, I think, football games. And her MSc degree in International Relations from the LSE. She worked as a print and television journalist and university lecturer from 1976 to 1991. And she was a chairperson of the Hong Kong Journalists Associations from 89 to 91. Throughout her political career, she's particularly dedicated to fighting for democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And her ultimate ambition is a democratically elected government in Hong Kong and in China. Because of her pro-democracy work and her outspokenness, she has not been allowed to travel to mainland China for over 20 years. This illustrious career has been receiving attention and awards and prizes. And if I just mention a number of them, an honorary doctorate from the LSE in July 2019, the Bruno Kreisky Human Rights Award from the Bruno Kreisky Foundation in Vienna in 1998, the Moniz Manien I hope I pronounce it correctly, Prize on Freedom of Speech from the University of Uppsala in Sweden in 2003, and the Political Leader Award from the Hong Kong Women's Foundation in 2009. So, without further ado, after this introduction, I'm really delighted to pass on the floor to you, Emily, and we are very, very keen to hear what you have to say. Thank you very much. Okay, that's good. You just have to then.
Thank you very much, Dr. Whither, and a very good evening to you all, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here in Cambridge. This is the second time I'm speaking in Cambridge. First time was about 20 years ago at Trinity Hall. So now it's good to be at another college. And I'm very grateful to my friend Tom over there and Dr. Whither and all of you. And I think we speak at a very, very difficult time in Hong Kong and in China, and maybe the rest of the world. I guess if you watch TV, you read newspapers, you listen to radio, you go online, you keep seeing stories about China and Hong Kong. This time, it's not about the protests. It's about the virus. Well, of course, I think many of you know that Hong Kong has gone through 8 months of protests since the middle of last year. First against the extradition bill, and then against police brutality, and then against the incompetence of the chief executive, Carrie Lam, for not only surrendering our high degree of autonomy, and now she seemed to be surrendering the well-being of the Hong Kong people. So tonight, I will talk a bit about this virus, talk about Hong Kong, where we came from, and where we are heading. But it's not just Hong Kong, it's China. Because Hong Kong's fate is inextricably tied to that of China. And as you saw just then, the question I put to Maggie, that was 35 years ago, and it's still valid today. Britain has a moral, and in fact, a professor at SOAS said, no, not moral responsibility, it's just a responsibility for the more than 3 million Hong Kong British citizens that she abandoned when she decided to hand Hong Kong back to China. In fact, I was studying at the LSE during the Sino-British negotiations. I covered them, you know, while I was studying. I also covered them for TVB News in Hong Kong. And then there was the Falklands War. I think many of you are so young, you probably don't remember that. And during the Falklands War, the MP said, and Thatcher said, the wishes of the Falkland Islanders are paramount. And there are less than 2,000 people living on those islands, which Ronald Reagan said is an icy cold bunch of rocks. The Argentinians invaded. Why? Because the Falkland Islanders refused to be handed back to Argentina. And those talks were tripartite negotiations in which the Falkland Islanders play a part. Remember, only 1,800 people, but there they have an elected executive and legislative council. In Hong Kong, we have 5.5 million people. And the executive and legislative council members were all appointed by London. So the Falkland Islanders didn't want to be handed over to Argentina. So they said no. And the tripartite negotiations could not go forward. And the economy of Argentina was bad. And what did the junta decide to do? They decided to invade, just to divert attention. And then, of course, the Americans helped the Brits. So they got the Atlantic conveyor and other things and went down and fought a war. And after the war, Parliament gave full British citizenship to the 1,800 people. And their wishes were paramount. But in the case of Hong Kong, what did the British government say? The situation of Hong Kong is unique. And actually, I never argue that Britain should go to war with China over Hong Kong. I don't think that's what Hong Kong people wanted. There wasn't an independence movement, there wasn't a self-determination movement at that time, because many Hong Kong people accepted they were Chinese, and Hong Kong was Chinese soil. So they didn't want to beg the British to remain, although the British wanted to, and the executive councillor like S.Y. Chung and Lydia Dunn, they wanted the British to remain, maybe to have administration, if you cannot have sovereignty. But of course, China said no. And you remember when Maggie Thatcher went to Beijing and had talks with Deng Xiaoping, she came out of the Great Hall of the People and she tumbled down the steps. Why? Why did the Iron Lady tumble down the steps of the Great Hall of the People? Because she was so unnerved by what Deng Xiaoping told her. Because she banged on the table and said, a treaty is a treaty is a treaty. And Deng Xiaoping turned to her, the interpreter, and said, who is this stinking cow? So, my dear friends, and the tragedy is, the Hong Kong people had no say. And that's why I put that question to Maggie. Well, I study at the LSE. I study international relations. What is the form of highest interest of your country, of the people who represent them? It's not the people's interest. It's their own national interest. So the 5 million people can go to hell. And she was saying at the press conference that the Chinese said, yes, we promise you, the Hong Kong people can continue to enjoy the free lifestyle that they enjoyed at the time without democracy. Actually, that was what people wanted, and then they wanted to develop democracy, which was also promised in the Sino-British Joint Declaration and the Basic Law. But of course, many people knew at the time, and they knew later, that China will not keep its promise. But for the first few years after the handover, things were okay. Then things started going wrong in 2003, when China forced the Hong Kong government to push through legislation on national security based on Article 23 of the Basic Law. Then we saw maybe 750,000 people marching in black on the 1st of July. And that forced the Liberal Party to abandon its support for the bill. It's not that the government withdrew the bill, no, it was the Liberal Party who withdrew the 8 votes. And that made China very concerned. How come we have so many people marching? Then they began interfering. So, my dear friends, so where are we now? Why did we have 8 months of protests? And the protests are not over. Now, because we are also consumed by this Wuhan virus. But still, we still have sporadic protests every day. I just heard on the radio from Hong Kong that there were protests, all dressed in black and beaten up by the police. So the people are still very angry about what happened. Over the bill, over the police brutality, the fact that Carrie Lam refused to listen to our demands. And what are our demands? They're not saying that, oh, now we want independence. Maybe some young people did, some older ones did. But most Hong Kong people are not asking for independence. They just want the government to set up an independent commission of inquiry, not just to investigate the police. Of course they should be investigated, but to investigate the whole saga. Why is it that the government makes such a blunder and caused the biggest crisis in Hong Kong's history? And surprisingly, up to now, and actually some Japanese MPs, opposition MPs, visited Hong Kong 2 months ago, and they asked me, they said, how come it was such a big blunder? How come nobody has stepped down? Nobody. But Carrie Lam, I think, she offered to step down, but the Chinese government would not allow her. So it's against this background that we have now this virus. This is a very, very big crisis, and it's going to impact not just China and Hong Kong and Macau, but many other places. I just heard that, the Formula One, the Chinese Grand Prix in Shanghai in April will be cancelled. A big telecommunication conference in some city in Asia will be cancelled. And I think there will be many more conferences, exhibitions, and things cancelled because people don't want to gather together and then they contract the disease. And the economy of China, of other places who are dependent on China, who trade with China, will also be affected. In China, we have so many cities under the lockdown. And many, they have told all their tour groups not to go out. And anyway, they will not be welcome by many countries. And Hong Kong students, mainland students, cannot go to Taiwan to continue their study. So, my dear friends, this virus has, according to the people in mainland China, triggered off this thing which may shake, or maybe has already shaken, the political and social system of mainland China to its foundation. Many people have gone online to express their displeasure, their anger, their frustration, particularly after the death of this doctor. He died on the 6th of February. And this doctor, Li Wenliang, he said, he did not put it online publicly, but when he knew that there was this, he thought it was SARS, there's this disease. So he shared it in his private group, the WeChat, on the 30th of December. And the following day, China reported to the WHO that there is a problem. But the police summoned Dr. Li to the station and reprimanded him and said he had committed something illegal. And if he does not repent, he may be punished. And then, of course, week later, he contracted the disease. And he died on the 6th of February. And when the news came out, in fact, they said he died at 9 p.m., but some people there would not allow him to die until 6 hours later, saying they tried very hard to resuscitate him. But when he died, there were more than 2 million things on WeChat. The people just exploded. And they wanted the government to declare that day as the National Day for Freedom of Expression. And they said the people must have a right to express themselves. And we in Hong Kong, have we got the freedom of expression? Well, when you see me talking like that, you say, of course, Emily Lau. Well, we have some, because we have one country, two systems. And that's the thing that Maggie Thatcher negotiated. But some of you are from Hong Kong. You may be able to tell us later what your experience is. But why did we have this 7-8 months of protests? Why were we against this extradition bill? Because the people were terrified that they may be sent to China for trial, because over there's complete lawlessness. And I speak with some authority, because I'm on the board of directors of the China Human Rights Lawyers Concern Group. And these are exceedingly courageous lawyers in mainland China. There are more than 200,000, maybe 300,000 lawyers practicing in mainland China. And many of them make a lot of money, like lawyers in other places. But there are only maybe 300 human rights lawyers. And these people practice to help the voiceless, the most powerless people. And by so doing, I mean, they are not political. But with the Chinese, every time you challenge the authority, it's deeply political. And actually, these people don't even have the money to pay the lawyers. So we try to help them. And we were lucky. 11 years ago, we set up the concern group in Hong Kong to support the lawyers. So it's not a secret society. We're registered with the Hong Kong government. We just want to offer support to these lawyers. Why? Because we believe that for a country to go forward, of course we want China to have democracy, as Dr. Whither said. We don't know when it's going to happen. I certainly hope I will see that in my lifetime. And if I don't, my dear young friends, I hope you will see it in your lifetime. But we all have to work at it. As I have said on many occasions, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, they just do not fall like manna from heaven. And I think many of us in this room, whether you are Chinese or you are not, I think many of you care about China. And I certainly hope that you will do whatever it is that is in your power to help to bring about a civilized, a humane Chinese nation. Nobody wants to destroy China, and anyway, you can't. Even the virus, I don't think it can destroy, but it can wreak havoc. But what we want is for China to join the global community as a civilized member, which would follow the code of behavior of civilized nations. So that's why when we in Hong Kong, I'm not a lawyer, but when a bunch of lawyers got together to form the group, and they asked me to join, I said, okay, good, because I support the cause. We all believe that in order, for China to improve, it must have an independent legal system. And of course, we hope that one day it will also have an independent judiciary, which of course it doesn't have right now. So we support the lawyers. And on some occasions, the lawyers were allowed to come to Hong Kong because, as Dr. Whither said, I can't go to mainland China. And when I met those lawyers, first thing I did was I took a picture of them, a passport photo. Why? Because they will go back. Because I said, I don't know when you will disappear, when you'll be locked up. And when it happens, it's useful to bring out that photograph. And I would take that and go to the Chinese government liaison office to protest. It's always useful to have a picture. And then I also asked the lawyers. I said, now you tell me, if something should happen to you, do you want us to protest? Or as some people would say, which I have heard, don't do it. We don't want to antagonize the government. We do it quietly and hope that it will be okay. So I said, you better tell me. Because if you're locked up, I can't ask you. And the lawyers say, scream at the top of your voice. Now this is what China will listen to. We have a case of a local journalist in Hong Kong, Ting Chang. He was arrested for espionage charges. He was very patriotic. At first, nothing, don't do anything. We hope we'll try to get it, get him released. And for more than a year, nothing happened. Then the family knew. We must go out, get all the help we can get. So, anyway, but those lawyers told us, you must do your best to preserve Hong Kong, preserve the freedom and the rule of law. It's not just important for Hong Kong. It's important for the development of China and for the international community. I agree with the lawyers, so we will do our bit. And the thing about Hong Kong is, the ironic part about Hong Kong is, we don't have democracy. Only half of the Legislative Council, half of the members are elected by universal suffrage, the other half are elected by limited franchise, like the banks, like the insurance companies, the transport companies, the chambers of commerce. And the chief executive, who's the head of the administration, is chosen by a committee of 1,200 people. And again, they are drawn from what the British created, the functional constituencies. That's what the British created in 1985, a year after the signing of the Joint Declaration. The lawyers, they have their constituency, the architects, the engineers, the doctors, the chambers of commerce. I always say, look, to the British, if you don't belong to a functional constituency, you have no function. How many people are in the functional constituency? Only 250,000. Out of now, over 7 million. But the Chinese loved the British creation so much, they put them in the basic law to make it very difficult to change. But in spite of the fact that we don't have a democratically elected government, but the level of freedoms, rule of law, personal safety that we enjoy in Hong Kong is much higher than many other countries which have periodic elections. Many countries in Asia and elsewhere, as you know. So for people who have traveled to Hong Kong, who lived in Hong Kong, you know, wow, this place is so vibrant, so free, and so safe. And we love all those things, but we try to fight for democracy, which is very important. But the 7-8 months of protests made us realize, and I hope also make you realize, that certain things you may have taken for granted for quite a while may suddenly disappear before your very eyes. So mark my words, my dear friends, especially my young friends. Take nothing for granted. The fact that you may be free, you may be safe, doesn't mean it will just carry on. So what should we do? What we need is eternal vigilance to try to safeguard the lifestyle that we want, not just for ourselves and our families, but for all the people in that community. And for us to try hard is very important. But because Hong Kong is so small, we also need the help of our friends in the international community. And of course, many of you are sitting in the audience. And in the last 6, 7, 8 months, you have seen the Hong Kong protests many times. And I've been on CNN, BBC, and elsewhere, And I kept saying, I want to thank the international community for expressing support for Hong Kong. And of course, they do not just do it because of Hong Kong. Many of the countries, they have many of their citizens living, working in Hong Kong. I mean, Canada has 300,000 Canadian citizens living in Hong Kong. I don't know how many Brits are there, Americans, French, many of these countries. They have a lot of people living there. So they have their own stake. But I think many people also recognize that in order for Hong Kong to be able to continue to be free, to be vibrant, and to have the rule of law, and enjoy personal safety, it would be good for China. That means we can press China to keep the promise, not to interfere and snuff out Hong Kong. And if China, within China, it can continue to have a city which is so vibrant and free and safe, I hope it will inspire other people in mainland China to want to strive for that. But of course, as I speak, I know that the price the Chinese people have to pay to speak out, to defend things that they want, the price is very high. And God knows how many millions have lost their lives doing just that. So sometimes we in Hong Kong, we tend to forget. And you, thousands of miles away, maybe you don't realize it. But now, with the death of Dr. Lee, people are speaking out. They said, if we don't do it, we feel guilty. We feel shameful. Why can't we speak out to defend our own interests? Why should we allow the government to just shut us up, to censor everything online? Well, actually, if I speak like this in mainland China, I'll get maybe 10 years for subverting state power. We have quite a number of human rights lawyers experiencing just that now. So it's such a thin line. But in the West, we hope you will tell your government, you will tell your members of parliament to be tough on China. Not completely to shut China out. You can anyway. I mean, your government just decided to get Huawei involved. But there are other people who object to it. And so the Germans have also made that decision. I have never gone all over the world and say, oh, impose sanction on China. No, I think we should trade with China, do all these things. But you should demand reciprocity. And that, I think, is very fair. You go there, how they treat you when they come here, how you treat them. But many countries, many governments, many politicians have told me, they say, no, we don't get the same treatment. When they're academics, I'm sure they are here, you can tell me, when their students come here, when their journalists come here, when the business people come here, the professional people come here, this is open society. They get access to many things. But when you go over there to mainland China, you don't get equal treatment. Or if you are not lucky or careful, you get locked up. So why do we accept that? Why the hell? I'm not you, but why do government people, business people, universities, why do you accept it? I think you know better than I do. You better tell me. Is it so difficult to demand China to give you reciprocal treatment, civilized behavior? And if we all agree to do that, unless China does not want to deal with all of you, well, China will have to comply. But now, China doesn't have to, because you people, your government, your universities, and your business, your companies, they're willing. I go there, I don't get the same treatment, but never mind. What the hell? Ah, there is an answer. Money, money, money. It's such a huge market. I want to go in there to make money. And here at the university, and this is not the only one, of course, that you have a lot of mainland students. I was in Toronto a few months ago, and they said 30% or 40% of their students are from the mainland. And if those students are withdrawn, I don't think the university would collapse, but there will be grave problems. So, and in Australia, the Chinese have been found to be infiltrating their political parties, making donations, and so on, and their university as well. So all these things are coming up. So I think what we need to do is to demand reciprocal treatment. And of course, as Donald Trump said many times, China steals all their, secrets, their intellectual property, technological secrets, and all these things. And I think many people do not like Trump, but there are others who love Trump, including some people in China, because they think Trump is the first Western leader who's so tough with China. I don't know how long he will stay tough, because he also wants to make sure he get re-elected and get money for the economy. But my dear friends, I think we are talking not just about the future of China, but the future of the international community. And China, as you know, is spreading its influence through the Belt and Road Initiative and all the other things. And China is exporting its model. I was at Halifax in this November at a forum like this, and there was this gentleman from an African country, Nigeria, a politician, and he said, we thank the Chinese for coming to do this, and and the Chinese model is so good. I said, what? He was shocked, but I was flabbergasted. But you see, there are people who think the Chinese model is something to be admired. And because it comes with money too. Actually, but some countries are not really getting so much benefits. So my dear friends, Hong Kong is a very small city, but I think we play a very important part in the development of China. And we certainly hope that we can continue to have our free lifestyle, personal safety, the rule of law, and civil liberties, and to develop democracy. But if you've been following developments there in the last few months, you probably think that it is maybe a pipe dream. But no matter what, we will continue to fight. As Chris Patten once called me, I'm a headbanger, but my head is still here. Certain things may be very difficult, but if it is something that we believe in, we will have a go. And as the saying goes, like a bad penny, I'll keep turning up. And as I said to the British government, and I will meet some of them later this week, it's disgraceful for them to abandon the several million British citizens. In fact, Geoffrey Howe, maybe some of you have heard of him, he was Foreign Secretary then. And he said, oh, if we allow the Hong Kong people to come to Britain, it will change our racial balance. And the Falkland Islanders are kith and kin. But I think there should be something about morality. When a country has run a colony for more than 1.5 centuries, and when it withdrew, there must be responsibility for the people. And as I said, I wasn't asking for a war. Hong Kong people were not fighting for independence. What do we want then? Well, they should have allowed us to have elections, like in Falkland Islands, and they should have given the people citizenship. Instead, they gave us the British National Overseas Passport. And I declare interest. I don't have a BNO passport. But there are millions who do. It's British National Overseas. No right of abode in the UK. So what do you have it for? It's a travel document. And I like to tell the British politicians, I said, you know what BNO stands for? It's Britain says no! And it's utterly disgraceful. I don't know what you think about it. You may be living here, you may say, oh, Emily, come on, how can we have so many people coming here? For a start, I don't think all the people would want to come here. But for those who do wish to come, do you not think Britain has a responsibility for them? So anyway, these are all very difficult, very heavy subjects. But these are the things that I have been fighting for my people, for decades. Although I have stepped down from the Legislative Council in 2016, but I will never step down from the fight for democracy, the rule of law, and for my people, my people's benefit. And of course, I certainly know that in order to safeguard my people's well-being, we need a civilized China. And that's difficult. And ultimately, I also accept that to change China, it's up to the people in mainland China, who may have to make huge sacrifices. But we, outside mainland China, we can do our part to help to bring that about. With trade, with education contacts, with all the other things. Just demand reciprocal treatment. Get China to act in a civilized way. Get China to join the international community as a law-abiding member. I think some leaders in the West are waking up to the fact that before, they have this illusion that they think, oh, let's help China and let China become great, and then China will join the global community and become part of us. I think many people, including some in this room, have this illusion. But after all these years, have you not seen it clearly? That it's not going to happen. Well, the Americans, I was just reading a book, and the Americans, they thought that was the way to do it. Help China with the technology, military things, everything. Make China grow, and of course, they want to use China as a counterweight to the Soviet Union. But still, I think all these good wishes, where have they ended up? But still, I'm not saying that you should sanction China or whatever. Just tell China to behave in a civilized way. Treat your people properly. This virus has exposed the fact that China has lied. One way to contain the spread of the virus is to make sure you have the confidence and the trust of your people but they have none. Well, not none, maybe, very few. So whatever statistics they give us, people do not believe in. And one of them I saw online, they say one of the Chinese organs, they say, in this newspaper, the only thing I believe in is the punctuation. So my dear friends, I hope I have given you a taste of what I wish you could do, not just for us, for China, but for yourself, because you are going to be impacted. Many of the things that you are going to be involved in and in the coming weeks, days, and months may be affected by what's happening in China. So, whether you like it or not, we live in a global village where things happen at the other end of the world will very quickly impact on us. So I certainly hope that we will all do our best to try to bring about a very civilized nation which respects the rights of its own citizens, particularly the voiceless and the most powerless citizens. And we in Hong Kong, I will come back to you again and again if I have the opportunity, Hydra, to talk to you about helping us, because if you see little Hong Kong being snuffed out, it will be a very big tragedy. And if I have any breath in me, I will not allow that to happen. And I want to thank you very much for your attention, and hope when things are in better days, you come out to Hong Kong to see us. Thank you.
Emily,
you asked the first question, okay?
Emily, thank you so very, very much. This was a formidable speech. Fiery, engaged, spirited, and as you said, you're going to talk from the heart. This you really did. Apart from giving us a tour de force analyzing international relations, the history of many nations. And one thing is clear, I think it's much better to have you as a friend than as an enemy. This is, I think, one of the lessons, definitely one of the lessons.
Don't say that.
We will now have plenty of opportunity, and I'm sure there will be more than one person who wants to say something.
Why not?
To have at least half an hour or more. We are not really bounded by time. We are only bounded by the drinks that are there afterwards as a reward. I will basically try to see how many people would like to say something, and we just go along either gathering some questions, giving it to Emily, or going one by one. I would only ask you to be quite precise and focused and short, but sharp, and then we get a sharp response. That can be guaranteed. So, a much more preeminent position to give me a bit of clarification pertaining to one little aspect about the Hong Kong protest that has been shrouded in mystery in the past few months.
Would you like to stand up, please, so that we can hear you?
So there's one aspect of it, I think, but there's one aspect that I find profoundly perplexing, and I believe you're in a much more powerful and informed position to maybe address it. So from the mainland spokespieces, you hear accusations such as foreign money pouring in to sponsor the Hong Kong protests. All right. This sort of has been a recurring theme in many of the pro-establishment rhetoric, but I have not yet seen any foreign money part being identified, being named. Oh, this think tank from Washington, D.C. has been making a donation of this much amount to certain and certain Hong Kong leader to, I don't know, to make them march through street whilst, taking time away from work. I have not seen a single one of them being identified. So this is one aspect I find very perplexing. Another aspect that I find perplexing is that whilst there has been no foreign money part or any money part being identified, I have sources telling me that, okay, this is the fishy bit of it. If you
if you think, what the mainland said is just pro-establishment propaganda, just their rhetoric, listen to this. I have sources, friends of family friends and so on and so on. Reliable source, but I'm making them anonymous for their own safety. Having their kids studying in a mainland university and joining the Hong Kong protest during their summer break. And once they returned back to mainland, they got expelled from university. Okay, so far sounds as scripted. A couple of days later, this young gentleman's bank account had a mysterious emolument about 5 digits. This is a reliable source. So this is what I find utterly perplexing. If what this gentleman says, suppose there has been some sort of funding agency for the protesters. I haven't talked to any of them, but suppose there has been it. Why has the mainland government not identified it? And suppose there isn't, why is the mainland rhetoric so fixated on the idea of foreign currency pouring in? Furthermore, has there been an inquiry from the mainland or from Hong Kong to investigate the funding of the protest at all? And if there has been so, what is the conclusion of it? Or what is its current development status? I would very, very much like to know.
Okay, thank you very much. That ended with a question, but I'd like to ask you to be a bit more concise. We take the three together, right? It was you, and then I'll just then we give it back to Emily and Noel.
Actually, I met you before in the protest in Hong Kong, and I was very small, and it's rather here to meet you again. I have two questions. The first question is about the moral responsibility of Britain and its force. And actually, during the elections, neither the Conservative or the Labour Party give a clear strategies on their policies towards Hong Kong and China. And even now, we all know that our Prime Minister Boris Johnson is carrying on huge infrastructure projects on the HS2 and also traffic lights, etc. So how can you persuade the Parliament members to prioritize the rights of Hong Kongers to the agenda? Is it enough for the human rights issue to be clarified only, or there should be more alternatives to let the British believe that it's important to give the rights of Hong Kongers to live here? And the second question is very easy. As a Hong Konger, as a Hong Kong youngster, we are very worried about future. And very simple, do we need to emigrate to another country?
Could we take the third one?
Whatever, what you decide, okay?
Okay, we take the third one. That was already really a step on the wrong direction. Right direction. If we can, actually the one.
No?
First of all, thank you for your presentation. So my question is, throughout your presentation, you have talked really a lot about Hong Kong's fate being closely tied with China's, especially with the democratization of China. But I personally studied the history of the Soviet Union, and I must say that in order for the so-called for the government to start to respect human rights, it actually only started from top down, which basically means that there are only three scenarios regarding the internal situation of China. So either it's in Hong Kong it's called Jibao, the implosion of China, or there's a reformist leader, or there's a coup, overthrowing Xi Jinping. So it all seems that your basic argument is that Hong Kong's future really depend on China's situation. But then you studied international relations, and so I was in Tromsø in Norway last week, and what I gathered from diplomats, like speaking of them, is like the Hong Kong people has definitely friends in the Ukrainian government, in the Danish government, in the Swedish government. But they never wanted to voice it out really loudly until
and especially with at a conference, a NATO, like a U.S. officer from NATO, she said, NATO is now getting more increasingly concerned with Chinese investment. So basically, what we are seeing now is that there will be a coming Cold War 2.0. So here's my question: is that, so what do you think the future role of Hong Kong should be or will be, if Hong Kong's role should only be like centered on being the foothold or base or revolutionary base of China's democratization? And the second point is, I'm wondering what your role is in the future, because esteemed politicians such as yourself, you will be meeting politicians in London next week, right? But then from what I get from your presentation is that in the public concern, especially among young people, we are starting to depart from the identity as being Chinese. So especially when the increasing popularity of the rhetoric of China being a colonial power in Hong Kong. So in your informal diplomacy with the British politicians, how would you represent the interests of those people who do not necessarily believe themselves as a Chinese, and or really don't care about Chinese democratization, stand Hong Kong's democratization? Why don't you give it a go?
Thank you very much. I will try to see if I remember all of them. If not, you can remind me. For the issue of foreign interference, you're right. They have never produced any evidence. A few years ago, when the chief executive of Hong Kong was C.Y. Leung, he said that in the Legislative Council meeting. He said there's foreign interference. And we challenged him. We said, where is it? We live in a city that has the rule of law. You cannot just mouth something. You have to give us evidence. Up to today, nobody, whether in mainland China or in Hong Kong, has been able to produce any evidence of whether it's interference by the CIA or the MI5 or whatever. But of course, that doesn't stop them from continue to mouth it. But next time when you hear it, you say, shut up! Either you produce the evidence or you shut up forever. They don't have it. So, but why do they use it? Because they want to pass the responsibility. They don't want to say, oh, this is my fault that we have this problem. It's there, the foreign devils. They come and try to stir things up. But they don't have any evidence. So, in the independent inquiry that we are demanding, that can be one aspect that they can investigate. If some people are so sure that there has been foreign interference or it continued to be, then okay, you can investigate that as well. For the BNO and whether you want to emigrate or not, who am I to offer any suggestion? Well, for people who feel unsafe, who want to find a future for themselves and their families, of course, why not? But if the British were willing to give the BNO passport holders citizenship, then they don't need to go to a foreign country, live there for 3 years to earn the right of abode. And the British government did that after the Beijing massacre in 1989, when there was a hemorrhage of talents. And they say, oh, don't run. We'll give you citizenship. But it was not for everybody. Again, it was mainly for those in the functional constituencies. And that was the BNSS scheme, British Nationality Selection Scheme, which ended up giving citizenship to 50,000 Hong Kong families. So those people who got their British citizenship under the scheme, they need not move. They need not go anywhere. But if things go wrong, then they They can come to Britain. And first they thought Britain would be in the European Union. They can go elsewhere too. But now, of course, they cannot. But so I think you have to make up your own mind. That's why some Hong Kong people, they move to Taiwan. Some even go to Malaysia and other places. Some want to go to America, and some want to go to Australia. So it is up to you. And the question about young people who don't want to be Chinese, who don't think they're Chinese. Well, what can I say? It's of course up to them to say that they're not Chinese. But I was at a Hong Kong Youth Forum 2 or 3 years ago when some of the students actually said they want independence. I said, fine. I said, you carry an adult identity card. You be responsible for what you say and do. I have been in politics, electoral politics, for 25 years. I think I know my people quite well. Many of them do not want independence, maybe for practical reasons. But they want to have their free lifestyle. They want to be safe. So, under one country, two systems. It's not perfect, but it's a scheme. If China would keep its promise, it would allow Hong Kong people, which many mainlanders do not like, because it would allow us to enjoy many things that people in mainland China do not enjoy. It's unfair, but that is the deal that the British and the Chinese government made in 1984. But now China is reneging on it. So to me, I told the Hong Kong youth students, one country, two systems is like you are sleeping next to a tiger. And if you keep using your pen to poke the tiger in its eye, well, you should know what's going to happen when the tiger gets crazy. There are certain things we have to understand in Hong Kong. But if the students, the young people, old people say, oh, we want independence and this and that, fine. I said, first of all, you tell me how many people you can find who will fight with you. Because this is a political movement. It's not a tea party. I do not know of that many who want it, but maybe there are. So, if you see many people who want to do it, you want to run that risk, you take the consequences. I cannot go and represent them because that's not something I believe in. But I can say I know of people who do want that. But I also know that most Hong Kong people do not want that. But they want their freedoms. They want the rule of law. And they want their personal safety, which is something many people in many so-called democratic countries do not enjoy. They can talk to a journalist. The minute they get out of the door, the journalist gets killed, the person gets kidnapped. Personal safety is something that you people may take for granted. But if you look around you, in many Asian countries, many other countries, people just simply don't have that. Don't have that very important thing. And we did have it, but we're about to lose them. That's why the people are so frightened and so worried. That's why we have to go all over the world and get our friends in the international community to speak out for us. Because there are two types of people that China would listen to, that Carrie Lam would listen to. A is the foreign governments, the rich and the powerful governments. B is the business community, the big corporations. But unfortunately, many of these people want to do business with China. So that's the conundrum. And it's not easy. So my dear friends, I have given you my answer. You may not like it, but I think we have all to do whatever it is in our way to help Hong Kong and not to make life even more difficult. Any other questions?
Yeah. For this debate, my question to you is,
Are you from Hong Kong?
Yeah. My question to you is, what do you think young people from Hong Kong who are overseas should do to advance democracy and human rights, either in their personal lives or in their professional careers?
Thank you.
Exemplary. First of all, in response to the humble mathematician, I participated a lot of times in lawful protests, and I'm broke. Also, not only I'm broke, I also pay to buy masks for my friends, buy water, buy supplements to sort of help the protest. So you may see me as a foreign interfering but I'm not. I'm from Hong Kong as well, very unfortunately. Emily, I have two questions for you. First one is, at the very outset of your speech, you remarked that Hong Kong's future and Hong Kong's democracy is linked to, or very contingent upon China's democracy and China's future. However, with the greatest respect, during the 20 years after the handover, we have been fighting for democracy within the system, as we have been doing all the time. We have been protesting in front of the government building. We have been protesting in front of the Legislative Council building. But all of these do not seem to work. And therefore, my first question is, do you think we are proceeding to the right direction to get democracy from mainland China if we continue to do it in your way? And my second question is, you said in your speech that the British have the moral responsibility and also an internationally legal responsibility to sort of demand sort of they morally owe and legally owe Hong Kong people British citizenship or democracy or human rights. But in the first aspect, citizenship is not only a philosophical question about whether the British government owe people or not. It's also about an issue of conflict of interest. It's a zero-sum game. The British government also owe the British nationals to their own interest, and also the British government is accountable to the British nationals if the British nationals are not willing to accept so many Hong Kong citizens. They have the right not to do so. And taking that into account, do you think your opinion still stays the same, and whether it's pragmatic for the British government to hold that at all? Thank you.
Okay, one more. My name is John Schwerer. I'm a fellow of this college. I have no particular, I don't hold a particular stake on any side of this. I'm just an interested observer. We were heading for our first trip to China, which we've had to cancel because of the coronavirus. So I just try to follow things in the newspapers out of interest. Nobody yet has commented on the success in local elections of the young protesters. That seems to me to be a significant step forward. Is there no optimism that that might be regarded as a step forward in perhaps developing Hong Kong independence, in a sense? I use the word with a small I. Anyway, I'd like to know your views about the recent election results, whether you dismiss them or whether you have some sense of optimism about them. And the other thing I'd just like to say is just a comment. As I say, a recent student of Chinese history is all I am, because we are planning a trip abroad. There was a phrase that you kept saying in your presentation, which I found actually very negative, and permit me to say. It was your insinuation all the time that China needed civilizing. I think it's a very unfortunate phrase to use.
How would you describe it?
China is one of the greatest cultural can't dismiss that. I'm not for a moment talking about the political human rights issues. I'm simply saying you're talking about one of the greatest civilizations. It doesn't help for a disengaged listener to have that kind of thing just brushed aside. Just a comment.
Thank you. Now, first of all, what can overseas students do? I mean, there's a lot. And I think many of you have been very active. And so you should continue to do that, to use your resources, to use your ability to try to help Hong Kong's cause, and also China's, to talk to your friends, to your professors, to the government here, to try to lobby. Because you are here already. You know, I flew thousands of miles to come here, but you are here already. So you should do it, and you should try to get people who think in a similar way to work with you, whether they are from Hong Kong, from China, or whether they're from here. There are people of all nationalities who may be interested, and so you work with them. It is very important. So we work over there, and you work here, and, you know, it will help. So I think it's very important. I have many mentees because I do many mentorship schemes, and I always encourage my mentees. I say, maybe you should do a project, do your thesis on what? On 2047, Hong Kong 2047. When you start thinking about it, then what's going to happen? When I was at the LSE last July, I asked the professors there to do it. And now I'm at Cambridge. I hope I can get the academics here to think about it, because many academics, when they do research now, they do it on China, which people understand. Very few people do things on Hong Kong. But if you also focus a bit on Hong Kong, particularly, do a paper, do a study on 2047, which is only 20-something years from now. It's not a long way away. As one journalist said to me recently, he said, oh, Miss Lau, you know, this 50 years, one country, two systems, it's just 50 years. And you are already 22 years spent, so you only have 20-odd years left. I said, you have heard of the expression, in the long term, we're all dead. So why don't you die now? I said, oh, Miss Lau, of course we don't mean that. But some people like to dismiss us. But you pick it up, run with it. Do a project on 2047. Try to find a consensus. If suddenly tomorrow you wake up and China said, yes, I want to talk to you about 2047. What do you young people want? Do you have a proposal to give to Beijing? Of course not. Do you have a proposal that's supported by all the young people? Of course not. Try to work at it. I think that is a great thing. Start in Cambridge. Start a 2047 concern group. Start talking about it. And to engage the Chinese ambassador, who's always on BBC. He was there yesterday again. So you go and say, we are 2047 concern group. We want to talk to you. So I think it's very important. Going back to the question about asking the British government to give us citizenship, it's difficult, which was raised earlier. I forgot to answer it. Because I have been fighting for this for so many decades, so I know. And now to quote Charles Dickens, this is the best of time and the worst of time. Actually, the situation now is much better than it ever was. I was here in July last year. I went to the House of Commons. I met members of the Foreign Affairs Committee, including the chair, Tom Tugendhat, and Bob Seeley. They were both from the Tory party. And they were very sympathetic. And Tugendhat wrote in his report on China and Hong Kong, which was published in March last year, he already talked about not one country, two systems, but only 1.5 system. So I said, you said that in March, and now it's July. So said that half is even less now, and he knows. So afterwards, he put it on Twitter. He said Britain should give full citizenship to the BNO passport holders. He's a member of the Tory party and the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And who else came out to echo Tom Tugendhat? The Sun. Have you read The Sun? The Sun had an editorial saying that should happen. That's why I say it's the best opportunity we've ever seen. But it's not going to fall again like manna from heaven. You got to fight for it. But you should do your lobbying. It's a short distance for you to go to Westminster. I came thousands of miles to do it. So why can't you do it? With politicians, if they keep seeing people writing to them, bothering them, then they will think maybe this is an issue. And I hope our dear friend who is trying to go to China would also support that. So I think it is important. And what is the question you asked me?
Are we proceeding to the right direction to fight within the system? Should we instead fight outside or beyond the system, like some Hong Kong youngsters are doing now?
Well, we all do it our way, so long as it's not counterproductive. I mean, all roads lead to Rome. So we do it your way. You want to be more radical or whatever, fine. So long as you think it's effective. But I would reject any accusation. I mean, I was interviewed by BBC last year. At midnight, they called me up. I was sort of half asleep. And suddenly the reporter said, "Hey, Miss Lau, you know some of the young people, they say it's all you people's fault. All these years, you use peaceful and non-violent means to fight, and you haven't got democracy. That's why we are in the state we're in now." And I said, I tell you what, it's true that we haven't got democracy. There's no doubt about it. But to say our effort, and not just Emily Lau or the Democratic Party, but the effort of millions of Hong Kong people in the last few decades were futile and in vain. That's bloody nonsense. The freedoms that we enjoy, the rule of law, and the personal safety, these things which are crumbling before our very eyes now, do you think they continue to exist because China is so charitable? It's because of all these millions of people who have fought for decades. And because you enjoyed it all these years, you just took them for granted. And you did not know that it's the effort of these people. People like Sito Wah, who's no longer around, and all these people who have fought for so long. That's why we can still speak freely. That's why I can travel to Cambridge to speak to you. Had it not been for the efforts of the people over the decades, we would be like, maybe not mainland China, we'd be like Macau, where you have almost no freedom. Maybe a bit better than mainland China, but not much. So don't talk us down. But if you want to do things your way, fine. I hope it will be effective, and I hope it will be supported. And for our dear friend's question, I hope you will go to China and come to Hong Kong too, when the virus and all that thing has subsided. Come and see us, and please look me up when you come to Hong Kong. I think the elections are very good, and but the district councils have no powers. And now they can't even hold meetings because the officials refuse to provide secretarial support. So one council held meeting outside in the flyover. They even locked the door. So it's very difficult. But it's good that the people exercise their vote. But coming in September this year, there will be Legislative Council election, and I hope even more people will turn out to vote. But as I told you, only half of the council are popularly elected. So we really need to change the political system to democratize. And the British government can help us. And the international community can help us, especially if the British don't want so many people to come over here. where if they help Hong Kong, if they ensure that we can continue to have our free lifestyle, our rule of law, our personal safety, many people are not going to upstick and move thousands of miles away. That's exactly what I told Maggie Thatcher. She kept saying, oh, well, this is a great future for you, the joint declaration and so on. I said, if this is really true, if you're not lying, why can't you give us citizenship? Even if you gave it to us, the people will not come. But if you are lying, all those the things you say will happen are not going to happen, and as it's happening before our very eyes, then of course, like you heard from the young people, they are very scared. And anyone would be. For those of you who live in this, until now, free and democratic country, maybe you don't understand. But I hope that you will appreciate that some people who are less fortunate than you are, they want to make plans for themselves and their families. And I hope this will not happen to you one day. But then who knows? Any other questions?
Could you just
answer the other question?
Engage with the question about civilization.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And then there will be a quick follow-up, right?
Yes.
That is, are you going to do it after that, or?
Let me answer the civilization.
Hang on to a question in my head with the method of delivery of an answer. The two things. There was a comment you made. You said, so long as the protest, I can't remember the phrase you used, doesn't set people back. And of course, the key thing was violence, was damage to property and violence, which gave the Chinese government, or could give the Chinese government, any security. From the point of view of somebody simply watching television news unfold, and goodness knows the bias in news, incidentally, the only thing we think is true in our newspapers is the punctuation, also in this country. Just in case you thought that it was true. Just watching the television, the single most important thing that we saw come out of the demonstrators was success in local elections. That may only be a small step in the right direction, but it is with great interest that we wait the elections of the legislature. And I still haven't heard from the gentleman here who's participated in the process. What is your view about the violence in the process? Is it just an unfortunate cycle that is inevitable because these things are not easy to control? Is it a strategic decision to introduce violence and damage because the other way hasn't worked before? What is happening there from the point of view of social media messages that are going into organizing the process further? But the one final comment. The question of passports, British citizen passport, is caught up in local politics and European politics. We have a government that has got a supermajority because it is against extending citizenship to everybody. It is closing in. It is separating from Europe. The context is politicians may pay lip service to it, but a supermajority is based on closing it off, on making the United Kingdom lesser, not more.
Okay, could you just address
The civilization, huh?
and perhaps
Yeah.
together we have to, because I really would like, if everybody wants to say something,
To say it,
have to
yeah,
have the rights
yeah.
to have the opportunity.
Well, China has a very long history, which is true. Some would say 4,000, 5,000 years. But how? I mean, what is the definition of being civilized? To me, and to many people in Hong Kong, to act in a civilized way is particularly to look after the interest of the downtrodden, the very poor, and the voiceless. If you behave like that, then you are civilized. It's not because you have 1,000 years of history. And if you treat your people like dirt, just even look at the history of the Chinese Communist rule. The Chinese Communist Party came into existence in 1921. They came to power in 1949. My family fled to Hong Kong to seek refuge in 1948. And during those decades, how many millions, tens of millions or more, of Chinese people have perished? How many people have suffered? And would I call that a civilized government? Sorry, I would not. And there are many, even Western governments, who are not civilized. Just looking at the way they treat their own people. But I think we can have this debate go on forever. we can have it over drinks afterwards.
Ask our friends over there to hang on for just to, you can have the last words. There was one there, one here, and you.
I wanted to ask you a question about the Chinese future, because you were talking about how the political model that Hong Kong has had has been that kind of it has significant freedom, it has rule of law, and it has personal safety, but it doesn't have democracy. And so if China is going to move into the future to develop, to become more civilized, as you're saying, is the example of Hong Kong, can that be used in China as kind of the more Chinese-friendly way to develop rather than to change into a democracy?
Well, maybe I answer it first. I think that if China wants to follow the Hong Kong model, well, first of all, they should respect the rights of their own people. But what we want is to develop one person, one vote, to have a democratically elected government. And that's the thing that Hong Kong people have been fighting for, the young people, the older people. So we are not encouraging other people to say, oh, do the Hong Kong model, no need for democracy, because it doesn't come that easily. You go and tell other countries, can you do it the Hong Kong way? Of course not. Sorry.
Very quick follow-up. Very quick.
Can I just specify? I would like to know whether you think that the Hong Kong way might be a more acceptable way for China to develop rather than to change into a democracy.
Well,
as in more friendly way that they would accept more.
Well, as a transitional measure, if they want to develop it that way, by starting to respect the rights of the people, to make sure they feel safe and have the rule of law, independence of the judiciary, I don't mind if they think that, to make that transition. And but I certainly think, and ultimately, it's up to the Chinese people in mainland China. And I hope they will have not just the courage, but the right and the safety to speak out. And now the death of Dr. Lee, I think, has stirred up millions of people. And I certainly hope that they will speak out like I speak out here. So when I walk out of the door, I will not be arrested by the police.
Brief, please brief.
Do you think that there's a generational divide with respect to the Hong Kong protests, and if there is, what might be?
Maybe related to what you asked. Of course, we can't predict history. Like, the Soviet Union, I guess, shows that unpredictable events can happen. But assuming that in 27 years, the Communist Party of China is still in power, do you see a realistic scenario that you would deem acceptable for Hong Kong and mainland China? Are they capable of reforming themselves? What do you think?
They're capable of what?
Reforming themselves. Because you take a pragmatic approach towards independence. You don't want to call for independence. and you call for granting British citizenship to Hong Kongers so that maybe they can flee China. I would like to know, what do you think, under the leadership of the Communist Party?
So we had two concise questions. That's the model to follow.
Just my question for you is that you talked about functional constituency and the British and Chinese government's concept that if you have no functional constituency, you have no function in society. And I read from history that you are one of the fervent opponents of Chris Patten's attempts to extend functional constituency franchise to all Hong Kongers back in 1995. Why do you think that was a bad idea if it's possible to reverse it so that everybody in society has a function and therefore has a functional constituency?
So maybe I answer that. I answer your last question. I voted against Chris Patten's bill because I said that was a drop of democracy. So what did I vote for? I had a bill in the council at the same time, which is something you cannot do now, because the Chinese government in the Basic Law took away that right for the members of the council to introduce private members' bill when we were able to do it under colonial rule. So of course I voted for my bill, which was for a fully elected legislature. So why would I want that when I have the whole thing? So why would I want that? Chris Patten called me up and said, Emily, let's make a deal. I said, yeah, what's the deal? He said, you support my bill. I said, then what? I said, you support mine? It was dead silence. I said, forget it. So we found to fight for the whole thing. And at that time, I actually had my bill there. So that's why I didn't support Chris Patten. And your question was on...
Do you see an acceptable scenario?
Oh, I see. To reform China. That's why I've been talking for over an hour, asking our friends in the international community to help, to push, to press, and to use the form of reciprocal treatment. If you just say, hey, China, why don't you reform? They don't listen. They think you're an idiot. But if you say...
Does the Communist Party have to go?
Well, I support the Patriotic Alliance, and they are fighting... They oppose one-party rule. They don't oppose the Communist Party. You can have a Communist Party fighting against a Democratic Party, fighting against the Social Democrats. That's fine. But we want a multi-party system. But what I'm saying is, if everybody worked together, particularly the international community, the business community, get China to give reciprocal treatment. You treat us the way we treat you. Then I think the way China behaves will be reformed. But the trouble right now is many of them just turn a blind eye because they want to go into the China market. So they don't care if China does not give them the reciprocal treatment. I think that is more effective way rather than to say, oh, please reform. They think you're just a bunch of idiots. If they can, they'll lock you all up. Just like they've locked up so many in China now. And I speak as a very big evidence of one country, two systems, because many people say, no more one country, two. I said, yes, there is. I'm the evidence. Because I can do it in Hong Kong. If I'm in mainland China, either I'll be dead or I'll be locked up for many years. You see what I mean? What's the other? I forgot the other question. It's getting late.
Generational divide.
Oh, yes.
Generational divide.
Well, but I think there is, of course, there are people like my age and there are very young people, but many of the protesters, the older ones, they support the young ones. Of course, some of them don't like the violence, but they support them. So that's why what we say in Chinese, 冇割席. So we don't have to, I don't know how you say it in English. You just don't say them and us. No, we're together. So I think that is the thing. They are very united. Although they may not support everything, the youngsters do. And they also feel the youngsters are very brave. And they are very courageous, and they are willing to make sacrifices. And so they all say, we must work hard to give these young people hope, to give them a future. So I don't think that is a big problem now. And that's why in the election, they voted, and it was very, very good, very high turnout, over 70%. And some of the people who stood, nobody's ever heard of them. And some of them are university students. And they were so shocked that suddenly they all got elected. They still haven't finished their work at the university. So there's not such a big problem.
Two quick questions along the same thread. But how should governments tell China to behave, or in your words, to mount reciprocity from China, where China is getting its way internationally through technological excellence, sharp power, and increasing allies in international organizations? Following on that thread, what do you think is the effectiveness of value discourse in today's world, when it seems that people are stopping to care or even stopping to follow international norms in the resurgence of material local interests politically around the world and increasingly blatant attempts of sharp power? Thank you.
That was exemplary again, yes. Thank you for the host, and thank you for Emily for calling out on human rights and being civilized, as we can see what's going on in Xinjiang with all the Uyghurs, and especially in a world organization barring 23 million Taiwanese in participating. So my question is really simple. It comes from at the very, we only get 10,000 more days until 24/7.
Is that right, 10,000?
So my question is really simple. As one of the youngsters in Hong Kong facing this problem, then as we can all see that China in its current model cannot coexist with Hong Kong's democracy and human rights movement. And as we can see that all the EU and the UK are with what's going on in the past year or so, they're only calling for restraint from both sides and a dialogue. So from what's going on, what you are saying is that as you've been a strong proponent in one country, two systems. So do you think that in order to reach democracy in Hong Kong, we can only rely on either having a democratization in China, which is unlikely to happen, let's all admit, or let's rely on foreign countries and pressurizing China, which is unlikely to happen as well with the sharp power and such. So do you think the Hong Kongers should just rely on these two external forces in dealing with and fighting for Hong Kong's democracy?
And last one, I'll keep this very brief. In 2010, I noted that you voted for a watered-down version of the democratic package and split the democratic movement along the middle in 2010. So along those, so from that, two questions. Firstly, do you regret it? Would you have done anything differently with hindsight? And my second question is that, do you think the Democratic Party or the moderate wing of the democratic movement, can it continue to command the loyalties of the young in the long term?
To answer your last question, if we turn the clock backwards, I would have done exactly the same thing. On that occasion, it was not a proposal for universal suffrage. It was a proposal to expand the system. But the government decided that, or proposed, to give 5 more seats to the 400 district councillors to elect amongst themselves, which we thought was crazy, because at that time, the district councillors already elect 1 member to LegCo. That was Ip Kwok Him. And they want to give them 5 more seats. So we said, no way. So one of our members, Mr. Wu Jiwai, said, okay. So it's functional constituency. It means it's limited. It's not universal suffrage. But we say, okay, we allow the district councillors to stand for election. They can nominate, they can stand, but all the Hong Kong people can vote. And at first, the Chinese rejected it. But at the very end, they suddenly changed their mind, which was quite extraordinary. And then they came out and said, oh, the Democratic Party's proposal is not against the basic law. So, it's not perfect, but it took a step forward. And after its passage, the Chinese government even came out and said, okay, now, you have satisfied the basic law's requirement that political development must be gradual and orderly. Because you have satisfied that, next time round, you will have universal suffrage. But then, of course, came the next time, they put a lot of limits on the electoral suffrage package. So to answer your question, no, I would not. I do not think we did it wrong. What we did do wrong was when some people pretended to be democratic and they started attacking us, and our party was very stupid. And we said, well, we better not argue with these people from the pro-democracy camp. We just allow them. And they attack us for 2 years. And then, of course, later we found out they were people who were getting money. Our friend over there were talking about money. So you know Hong Kong society has been infiltrated, subverted. So that's our stupidity, not to fight back instantly at the time and to allow people to attack us for 2 years. But would I do it again? Yes. And now what do we do? How do we fight for democracy? I say use everything in your armory. Whatever you can, international community, business community, university, your friends, we just have to be, you are talented students, you are resourceful. We don't just choose one route. But you talk about the European Union. Good. If you can, go to Brussels. Go to the European Union, because Britain is getting out anyway. You go there, but you should still lobby Britain, of course. But go there. Tell them. You're not saying that, we want you to suffer financial loss. Oh, no. We want you to continue to do business. But just ask China to behave, my dear friend, in a civilized way, to behave as people, as law-abiding members of this international community, to behave like that. So I think you have to press them. But of course, you will come up against people who refuse, because some of them actually have become consultants of China. They used to be your own politicians or used to be your academics, and they turn around and they go and work for the Chinese government. I think you know of such people. So it is a very difficult world, but we need to. And you must use every avenue that is available. And of course, you protest is very important. So that's why the protests in Hong Kong have attracted so much international attention, because people admire them. And they could not believe their tenacity. How can you protest for 7 months? They have arrested about 8,000 people. And the people still will not give up. So why should you give up when you live a comfortable life here? So that's the least you can do to help Hong Kong.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You gave us, and to you, to the audience, not only a lesson in sharp analysis and in political engagement, but you also gave us a lesson, I think, of civic courage. I think sort of like, the model, as you're standing here as a model with your lifetime achievement in politics, still running and still very formidable, and probably even more formidable in the future. We wish you all the best for your talks in London and for Hong Kong for the next 27 years and after. And I think you've gathered here a number of fans and supporters who will try to take these lessons on board and do their own share in fighting for Hong Kong's liberation. Or, liberation, and for the systemic change in China, which I must confess also, I'm not as optimistic about that. But I think, as you say, there are many resources in the world. Thank you very much again, and I will invite you for the drink.